The rushing waters of the Colorado River roared like a hungry beast as Owen Blackwell rode along its banks. His weathered hat pulled low against the harsh June sun of 1873. The 26-year-old cowboy had been trailing a herd from Texas to Montana for nearly 3 weeks, but had broken away from the group to scout ahead for safe crossing points. What he found instead changed his life forever. A sound carried over the rumble of the river, faint but unmistakable. A baby's cry, thin and desperate, followed by a woman's weakening call for help. Owen yanked his horse to a halt, standing in his stirrups to scan the churning waters. "Hello," he shouted, his voice nearly lost in the roar. "Where are you?" Then he saw them, a dark-haired woman clinging to a half-submerged log with one arm, while holding an infant above the water with the other. They were trapped on a sandbar in the middle of the rushing current, the woman's strength visibly fading. Without hesitation, Owen dismounted and secured his horse. He stripped off his gun, belt, boots, and heavy coat, leaving only his trousers and shirt. The current looked strong but not impossible. He'd grown up swimming in the rivers of East Texas, but this was different. This was life or death. "Hold on," he called. "I'm coming." He waded in, the cold water instantly stealing his breath. The rocky riverbed was treacherous underfoot as he pushed against the current, moving diagonally toward the sandbar. The water rose to his waist, then his chest, forcing him to swim. The woman saw him coming and tried to call out, but her voice was weak. The baby's cries had grown more frantic. "Please," she managed as Owen neared them. "My baby." Owen reached the sandbar, his feet finding purchase on the shifting ground. Up close, he could see the woman was young, perhaps 22, with striking blue eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Her dress was torn and waterlogged, her lips tinged blue with cold. The baby, wrapped in a soaked blanket, couldn't have been more than 6 months old. "I've got you," Owen said, reaching for them. "What happened?" Wagon, crossing upstream, she struggled to say. "Broke apart. My husband, he's gone." Owen felt a cold weight in his stomach that had nothing to do with the river. He looked at her left hand and saw a simple gold band. "I'm sorry," he said, genuinely meaning it, "but I need to get you and your child to safety." She nodded weakly, and Owen realized she had been in the water far too long. Her strength was fading fast. "Give me the baby," he said gently. She hesitated, maternal instinct warring with necessity. "Please," Owen said. "I'll keep your child safe." With trembling arms, she passed the infant to him. The baby was a little girl, her face red from crying, her tiny fists clenched against the cold. Owen tucked the child inside his shirt, against his chest, providing what warmth he could. Then he looked at the woman again. Her eyes were starting to close. "Hey, stay with me," he said sharply. "What's your name?" "Clara," she whispered. "Clara Turner." "I'm Owen Blackwell. Listen to me, Clara. We need to get across, but the current's strong. Can you hold on to me?" She nodded weakly, and Owen positioned himself to support her with one arm while keeping the baby secure with the other. The return journey would be much harder against the current, with 2 lives depending on him. Looking at the raging water, Owen felt fear grip him for the first time. He hadn't prayed since he was a boy sitting beside his mother in church. His father had been a hard man who considered religion a weakness, and Owen had long ago stopped believing anyone was listening. But staring at death in that river, with an innocent baby pressed against his heart and a grieving widow's life in his hands, something broke inside him. "God," he whispered, the word feeling foreign on his lips. "If you're there, please help us." With Clara clinging to his shoulder and the baby tucked against his chest, Owen pushed off from the sandbar. The current immediately tried to sweep them downstream, stronger than he had anticipated. Clara gasped as the water splashed over her face, and the baby wailed at being jostled. "Keep praying," Clara whispered in his ear, her faith apparently stronger than his despite her circumstances. So Owen did. As he fought the current, as his muscles burned with effort, as his feet slipped on the rocky bottom, he kept up a steady stream of desperate pleas. Please get us across. Please don't let me drop them. Please give me strength. Inch by hard-won inch, they moved toward the shore. When Owen's foot hit a deep spot and they briefly went under, he surfaced with a roar, lifting Clara and the baby higher as he redoubled his efforts. Almost there, he gasped. Though the shore still seemed impossibly distant, Clara's grip on him was weakening. "Owen," she said, his name barely audible. "If I don't make it, don't talk like that," he cut her off. "We're all making it." With one final surge of strength, Owen lunged forward, finding shallower water. His feet touched bottom more firmly, and he half-carried, half-dragged Clara toward the shore. When they finally reached the bank, he collapsed to his knees, still cradling the baby against his chest. Clara lay beside him, coughing up river water, her breathing ragged but present. The baby had stopped crying and was making small, whimpering sounds. "Thank you," Owen whispered. Not sure if he was addressing Clara or God, he helped Clara to a sitting position, then carefully handed her the baby. The sight of mother and child reunited, both alive against the odds, struck something deep within Owen. Clara looked up at him with tears mixing with the river water on her face. "You saved us," she said simply. "I think something bigger than me had a hand in it," Owen replied, surprising himself with the admission. He gathered wood for a fire while Clara changed the baby into one of the few dry clothes from the small bundle that had somehow stayed attached to her throughout the ordeal. As flames began to dance, warming their shivering bodies, Owen learned more of Clara's story. She and her husband James had been traveling from St. Louis to California, seeking a fresh start after losing their farm to drought and debt. James had been a skilled carpenter, confident he could find work in the booming West. They joined a small wagon train but separated from the main group to take what a guide had claimed was a shorter route. The river looked crossable, Clara explained, her voice hollow with fresh grief. James tested it first, but the current was stronger than it appeared. The wagon started to tip. He pushed me and Sarah toward the back, but then she couldn't continue and Owen didn't press her. He'd seen the power of that river firsthand. "How long were you out there?" he asked instead. "Hours," Clara said, looking down at baby Sarah, who had finally fallen asleep in her arms. "The log caught on that sandbar. I kept hoping the others would come looking, but—" Owen nodded grimly. The wild country had a way of separating people, often permanently. "My camp isn't far," he said. "I've got dry clothes, more food, and better shelter. Can you travel a short distance?" Clara looked up at him, measuring this stranger who had already risked everything for her. "Yes," she decided. "We can travel." Owen helped Clara onto his horse, then handed baby Sarah up to her. He took the reins and led them on foot back to his camp, which was nestled in a small grove of cottonwoods about a mile upstream. The whole time, he kept thinking about that moment in the river, that desperate prayer that had somehow been answered. By the time they reached his camp, Clara was swaying with exhaustion in the saddle. Owen helped her down and quickly prepared a place for her and Sarah to rest in his small tent. He built up the fire and heated some beans and jerky trail food, but hot and filling. "You should sleep," he told Clara after she'd eaten a few bites. "We're safe here," she nodded, her eyelids already drooping. "What about you?" she asked. "I'll keep watch," Owen assured her. "You and Sarah rest now." As Clara and the baby slept in his tent, Owen sat by the fire, turning over the day's events in his mind. He'd been drifting for years, taking whatever ranch work came his way, never staying in one place long enough to form attachments. Now, suddenly, he had responsibility for two vulnerable lives. More unsettling was the prayer that had sprung from his lips in that moment of crisis. Owen hadn't considered himself a religious man, but something had changed in that river. He'd felt something, a presence, a strength beyond his own. "I don't know what I'm doing here," he whispered to the night sky, "but if you're listening still, help me do right by them." The next morning, Owen woke to find Clara sitting by the rekindled fire, Sarah nursing contentedly in her arms. The first rays of sunlight caught in Clara's dark hair, now dried and falling in waves down her back. Despite her circumstances, there was a quiet dignity about her that struck Owen deeply. "Good morning," she said, noticing him watching. "I hope you don't mind that I started the fire." "Not at all," Owen replied, sitting up from his bedroll. "How are you feeling?" "Sore, sad." She looked down at Sarah. "But grateful, so very grateful." Owen nodded, understanding both her grief and her gratitude. He'd seen enough death on the frontier to know how easily yesterday could have ended differently. "I need to ask what you plan to do now," he said gently. "The nearest town is Fort Collins, about 3 days' ride. I was headed north with a cattle drive, but—" "You've already done more than enough," Clara said quickly. "I wouldn't ask you to change your plans further." "That's not what I meant," Owen replied. "I'm saying I can take you to Fort Collins. You could find passage to California from there, or whatever you decide." Clara was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I don't know what to do," she finally admitted. "All our money, our supplies, everything was in the wagon. James had family in California, but I've never met them. I'm not sure they'd even want us." The vulnerability in her admission struck Owen hard. This woman had lost everything except her child, yet still maintained her composure. Something about her courage called to something long dormant in him. "You don't have to decide right now," he said. "Let's get to Fort Collins first. I have some money saved. It's not much, but it's enough to get you situated somewhere safe while you figure things out." Clara looked up at him, surprise and wariness mingling in her expression. "Why would you do that for strangers?" Owen considered the question seriously. "Because yesterday in that river I asked for help for the first time in many years, and somehow we all made it out alive. Seems like the least I can do is pass that help along." Clara studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Thank you, Owen." They broke camp after breakfast, Owen carefully packing his few possessions and helping Clara fashion a sling for Sarah from a spare shirt. The baby seemed remarkably resilient, cooing and grabbing at Owen's beard when he came close. "She likes you," Clara observed with the ghost of a smile. "Just doesn't know any better yet," Owen replied, but he felt a strange warmth at the baby's acceptance. The journey to Fort Collins was slow but steady. Owen's horse couldn't carry all three of them for long stretches, so they alternated Clara and Sarah riding while Owen walked, then Owen riding while Clara walked with Sarah in her sling. They talked during those long hours on the trail, sharing their stories. Owen told Clara about growing up on a small ranch in East Texas, about losing his mother to fever when he was 12, about his father's harsh ways that had eventually driven him to leave home at 17. He shared tales of the cattle drives he'd been on, the places he'd seen, the skills he'd picked up along the way. Clara spoke of her childhood in St. Louis, her courtship with James, their dreams of building a life together in California. She talked about the drought that had destroyed their farm, about James's determination to give Sarah a better life, about the bittersweet joy of having her daughter while losing everything else. On the second night, as they camped beside a small creek, Clara asked the question Owen had been expecting. "You said yesterday that you prayed for the first time in years," she said quietly after Sarah had fallen asleep. "Why did you stop in the first place?" Owen poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks spiral upward into the darkening sky. "My mother was a believer," he said finally. "She used to read the Bible to me every night, teach me prayers. My father tolerated it because he loved her, but after she died, he had no use for God. Said if God was real, he wouldn't have taken the only good thing in our lives." Clara nodded, understanding in her eyes. "And you agreed with him?" "I was angry," Owen admitted. "And over time, that anger just turned into nothing. I stopped believing, stopped caring whether God existed or not." "Until yesterday," Clara prompted softly. Owen met her eyes across the fire. "Until I saw you holding Sarah above the water with the last of your strength. Until I realized I wasn't strong enough to save you both on my own." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of shared understanding between them. "My faith has been tested too," Clara finally said. "Especially now. But I've always found that in my darkest moments, that's when I feel God's presence most clearly. Not because he prevents the darkness, but because he walks through it with me." Her words stayed with Owen long after she'd gone to sleep. He sat by the fire, watching the stars wheel overhead, and wondered if perhaps Clara was right if he hadn't been abandoned all those years ago, but simply hadn't recognized the presence walking beside him through his own darkness. The third day of travel brought Fort Collins into view by late afternoon, a small but growing settlement nestled against the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. Owen felt an unexpected reluctance as they approached the town. Soon Clara and Sarah would be somewhere safe, and his duty to them would be fulfilled. The thought brought him less relief than he expected. They found rooms at a modest boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Peterson, who took one look at Clara with baby Sarah and immediately offered her best room at a reduced rate. Owen paid for 2 weeks in advance, ignoring Clara's protests. "I'll be leaving tomorrow," he told her as they stood awkwardly in the hallway outside her room. "The cattle drive will be passing near here and I should rejoin them." Clara nodded, disappointment flickering briefly across her face before she masked it. "Of course. You've done so much already. I can't thank you enough." "You don't need to thank me," Owen said. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Clara replied firmly. "Not anyone would have risked their life the way you did. Not anyone would have been so kind afterward." She stepped forward and, standing on tiptoe, kissed his cheek gently. "Sarah and I will never forget you, Owen Blackwell." Owen felt his face flush. "I'll check on you before I leave," he managed to say before retreating to his own room. That night, Owen barely slept. He paced the small room, thinking about Clara and Sarah, about the cattle drive waiting for him, about the life of rootless wandering he'd been living for so many years. By dawn, he'd made a decision that surprised even himself. He found Clara in the boarding house dining room, Sarah cradled in one arm while she attempted to eat breakfast with the other. Without a word, Owen sat across from her and reached for the baby. "May I?" he asked. Surprised, Clara handed Sarah over. The baby settled contentedly in Owen's arms, staring up at him with innocent curiosity. "I've been thinking," Owen began, his voice low. "Fort Collins is growing fast. They're building new houses every day. I'm handy with tools and I've saved enough to maybe start a small carpentry business. It wouldn't be much at first, but—" He trailed off, suddenly unsure of himself under Clara's wide-eyed gaze. "What are you saying, Owen?" she asked softly. "I'm saying I don't want to leave," he admitted, looking down at Sarah to avoid Clara's eyes. "Not yet. I thought maybe I could stay, help you get settled, maybe find some work here myself." Clara was silent for so long that Owen finally looked up, fearing he'd overstepped, but her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "I'd like that," she whispered. "I'd like that very much." The weeks that followed took on a rhythm neither of them had expected. Owen found work helping build a new mercantile downtown, while Clara took in sewing to supplement the money he'd given her. They saw each other daily, Owen coming by the boarding house to check on them, sometimes bringing small gifts for Sarah, sometimes simply sitting with Clara after a long day, talking about everything and nothing. Slowly, tentatively, something began to grow between them. Not the passionate whirlwind Owen had witnessed between other couples, but something deeper, rooted in shared experience and mutual respect. Clara was still grieving James, and Owen was careful never to push, never to assume, but they were drawn to each other nonetheless. By the time autumn painted the cottonwoods along the river with gold, Owen had saved enough to put a down payment on a small house at the edge of town. It had 2 rooms, a solid roof, and possibilities for expansion. "It's not much," he told Clara when he showed it to her, suddenly nervous about what she might think. "It's perfect," Clara replied, bouncing 9-month-old Sarah on her hip. The baby had grown plump and happy, her dark curls a mirror of her mother's. "But Owen, I don't understand. Why would you buy a house here?" Owen took a deep breath. He'd rehearsed this moment countless times, but now that it was here, words failed him. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box he'd carved himself. "Because I want to stay," he said simply. "With you. With Sarah, if you'll have me." He opened the box to reveal a simple silver ring, not fancy but the best he could afford. Clara's free hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with surprise. "Owen, I know it hasn't been long," he hurried to explain. "I know you're still healing. And I know I can never replace James. I wouldn't try to. But I love you, Clara, and I love Sarah as if she were my own. I want to build a life with you both if you'll give me that chance." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, but she was smiling through them. "I never expected to find love again," she said softly. "Especially not so soon, but you, from that first moment in the river, you've been saving us in one way or another." She stepped closer to him, shifting Sarah to her other hip. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, Owen Blackwell." They were married in the small church at the center of Fort Collins 2 weeks later. The ceremony was simple, attended by the few friends they'd made in town, and presided over by a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through. As Owen stood beside Clara, reciting vows he'd never thought he'd speak, he found himself offering another silent prayer, this one of gratitude rather than desperate pleading. For the river that had brought them together. For the second chance neither of them had expected. For the family they were creating together. After the ceremony, several townspeople approached to congratulate them, but Mrs. Peterson, their former landlady, surprised them most. "I knew from the moment I saw you two together," she told them with a knowing smile. "Some things are just meant to be." That night, in the small house that was now their home, Owen held Clara close as Sarah slept peacefully in her cradle nearby. "Do you ever wonder," Clara asked softly, "what would have happened if you hadn't heard me calling that day, if you'd taken a different route along the river?" Owen considered the question seriously. "I used to think life was just a series of coincidences," he said finally. "Good luck, bad luck, random chance. But now, I'm not so sure." He kissed her forehead gently. "I think maybe I was always meant to be there, to hear you, to find you and Sarah." Clara smiled up at him, like a prayer being answered before it was even asked. "Something like that," Owen agreed, thinking of how far he'd come from the man who'd stopped believing in prayers long ago. "Though I'm still figuring out how it all works." "We both are," Clara said, nestling closer against him. "But we'll figure it out together." 5 years later, Owen stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching Clara in the garden with their children. Sarah, now a lively 6-year-old with her mother's dark curls and a spirit as wild as the Colorado that had nearly claimed her, was helping her 3-year-old brother Oliver plant seeds. Their newest addition, 4-month-old Emma, slept peacefully in Clara's arms. The carpentry business Owen had started had flourished as Fort Collins grew, allowing them to build not just a home but a life together. There had been challenges, harsh winters, difficult pregnancies, the time Sarah had fallen ill with fever, and they'd feared losing her, but through it all, they had faced each trial together. Owen often thought about that desperate moment in the river when he'd offered his first prayer in over a decade. How that single act of faith, born of desperation, had changed everything. He still wasn't a perfect man of faith. He still had questions, still had doubts. But he had learned to see the divine in the everyday moments, in Clara's smile, in Sarah's laughter, in Oliver's curiosity, in Emma's tiny fingers gripping his. He stepped off the porch and walked toward his family, his heart full. Clara looked up as he approached, her face lighting with the same smile that had first captivated him. She had flour on her cheek from the bread she'd been baking, and her hair was coming loose from its pins. But Owen thought she had never looked more beautiful. "What are you thinking about, looking so serious?" she asked as he reached them. Owen smiled, taking Emma from her arms to give her a rest. The baby snuggled against his chest, just as Sarah had once done when he carried her from the river. "I was thinking about prayers," he told Clara honestly, "and how sometimes we don't even know what we're really asking for until it's given to us." Clara's expression softened with understanding. She reached up to touch his face gently. "And did you get what you were asking for?" Owen looked at his family, at the love and life they'd built together from that terrifying moment in the rushing water, and nodded. "More than I ever knew to ask for," he said. "More than I ever dreamed possible." As the sun began to set over the Colorado foothills, casting long golden shadows across their land, Owen offered another silent prayer, this one a simple thank you for the family that had taught him to believe again. Not just in God, but in love, in second chances, in the possibility of building something that would last far longer than his own lifetime. And somewhere in the distance, as if in answer, came the sound of the river flowing ever onward, carrying new beginnings on its rushing waters.